Hello, everybody. Happy Monday. Thank you for joining us on our fourth live stream of Protect the Kids. I am Shannon Adcock. We are streaming out of Wake, Illinois across all of our platforms. And I just want to reiterate, we've had 3 of these episodes that aired last week. We had Jeff Cleghorn, we had Jeanette Cooper of Partners for Ethical Care, and on Friday, we had January Littlejohn, a mom who is empowering parents to know how to protect their children from gender ideology. And it is my pleasure to welcome to our 4th episode here today of Protect the Kids, Dr. Quentin Van Meter. So I'm going to welcome him on here. Hello, doctor. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Great to be here. Thank you so much. I know January. I met her several times, actually, and her story is compelling, and her verve for the subject of protecting children is pretty amazing. So this is a complex medical problem that has been beneath the surface until recently, and it has erupted, and it just is like a volcano. It's gaining more and more momentum here in the United States, which is somewhat alarming. So
it is. So I'm grateful for your time. You are a doctor, you're a pediatric endocrinologist, you're a father and a grandfather. So thank you for taking time to come on this stream and to really educate people from your clinical perspective, the background of this ideology and the concerns that you have in the clinical application of effectively gender medicine. So why don't you just walk us through who you are, and we'll just delve into this subject.
Okay. So I'm a board-certified pediatric endocrinologist practicing in private practice in Atlanta, Georgia. I've been here 33 years. In my heart, I'm also just a pediatrician. I did a 20-year career in the Navy Medical Corps and was able to do both pediatrics and pediatric endocrinology. The Navy actually sent me to my fellowship at Johns Hopkins back in the late 70s. And so when I was at Johns Hopkins, very interestingly, one of the faculty members that interacted with us fairly regularly was Dr. John Money, a clinical psychologist who headed up what was called the psychohormonal group. Dr. Money, it was the starter, if you will, or the promoter of the concept that gender identity was this internalized sense of who you were sexually. And that was his concept. He thought it was pretty malleable. He worked with families who had infants with ambiguous genitalia, but he also worked with kids that started puberty too early or too late, kids who had disorders that made their genital structures somewhat ambiguous at birth, but that with medication could be treated and these things could be resolved. Those of us that worked with him, especially those of us who were sort of faith-filled individuals of many stripes, Jewish, Muslim, and Christian alike, we had a sense that Dr. Money was not very ethical in terms of what was then purely experimentation on children. His concept was, I have an idea. This could possibly happen if we do this. Let's do it and see what happens. Well, this was before the days of committees to protect human subjects and research. There was no informed consent. There was just, this is John Money. He's the expert. We'll follow what he says, what we should do. In the long run, over the span of 12 or 15 years, he ended up having about 75 to 80% of his patients fall back and try to pull away from what had been recommended because they were harmed in one way or the other. In a tragic case of a boy who was basically turned into a girl in appearance in infancy, ended up committing suicide, and his twin brother ended up being a drug addict who died of overdoses. And so it was a very tragic consequence of having dealt with Dr. Money, followed his advice, and flopped into the ground and with a miserable outcome. Dr. Money, I'm hesitant to call him a pervert because that is name calling, but he had very perverted ideas of what to do with children, to teach them about sexuality. He taught little prepubertal boys who were producing hormone, one in particular who was producing testosterone from a tumor in the testicle. He taught him how to masturbate, and then subsequently it was recorded how many times a day this boy was masturbating, which was legendary. So it was this kind of thing that if anybody even suggested that in this day and age, it's much like Alfred Kinsey's experiments on infants. That would be cause for jail time, for sure, and certainly loss of ability to interact in any way with patients. But that's just kind of what happened with Money. He fell down in disgrace. The chairman of the psychiatry department who came in and the late 70s, Dr. Paul McHugh, basically reviewed his success rate, found it to be dismal, and closed his program and had him sort of essentially put aside on the faculty. That was quiet. Johns Hopkins closed this sort of experimental psychohormonal group intervention, if you will, in the early 80s. And it laid quiet until 2017 when Hopkins was back in the fold again, and developed their own transgender clinic. They were very proud of it. They cited John Money as being the pioneer in the field and how grateful they were to have been part of it all this time. It was a disgrace for a number of years, and all of a sudden it's celebrated as a wonderful thing. So it's wow. I have actually sent letters to the editor of the Children's Hospital magazine for Johns Hopkins, and when they brought him out of the cellar and celebrated him long after his death, and said, this is not right. You should not be celebrating this man who created so much havoc. And I didn't get a response from them because that's not what they want to hear. If they're not going to publish a letter to the editor or even retract what they'd written about it, what a saint he was, because he was clearly not a saint. I left that fellowship program, and it was 13 years later after I'd moved to Georgia for several years, that I had my first patient come to my office. It was a biological boy, age 13. Family was a military family. They had moved frequently, which, by the way, is an adverse childhood experience for sure. I didn't get any information about this child's psychological evaluation, but they had seen a psychologist or a psychiatrist in Los Angeles before the move to Atlanta in 1993. And that psychiatrist recommended that he be raised from that point in time with a new identity as a girl when they moved to their new duty station where no one knew them. This child arrived in my office, and I said, what on God's green earth do I do? They were asking me to treat him with estrogen. And I said, I can't even, dosing, what's that all about? Liability for if the things go wrong. So I called all of my mentors on faculties that had been, my teachers at Hopkins and other people that I'd met subsequent to my fellowship in our endocrine community, and said, what do you guys do? They said, we've never heard of that. We have no idea. If you're going to do it, this might be a schedule of adding estrogen slowly but surely. But you better get your practice attorney to get a really tight, consent form that if anything goes wrong, it's, the parents have chosen to do this. You've been asked to do this. You've reviewed, but there is no guideline to follow. And so I did that, and the parents signed the form, and the boy was started on estrogen. And then about 5 months later, the family moved up to the Washington, D.C. suburbs, lost contact with them, have no idea where this child is, or he's no longer a child. But the idea was that this is 1993, okay, just, 21 years ago. No idea. No one had any protocol anywhere, okay? And so this was way out of the box, not condoned by anybody. And all of a sudden, here we are where it is, cause célèbre, and there are, 70 academic medical school departments that run transgender clinics. There are several hundred Planned Parenthood services being provided. There are 2 online services that for just an interview over Zoom, you can get your medication with 1 visit. Okay, no in-person visit, ostensibly prescribed by a physician. So we've gone from 0 to 500,000 miles an hour in our country here. This all began. The idea began because the Netherlands had an idea. And having treated adults with transgender for numbers of years, the adults said, hey, if only we hadn't had to go through puberty and get all the, quote, wrong physical attributes of our biologic sex imprinted in our bodies to the point where they're very hard to change. The women that wanted to be men, and most often the men that wanted to look like women, they couldn't really achieve it because the biologic men's shoulders were too broad. Their feet were gigantic. They had calves the size of a tree trunk. They had hair everywhere. Their voices were deep. They were hairy everywhere. And they said, gosh, it would be easier if they just didn't have all those changes. Let's try this. And so they started a protocol in 2000 in the Netherlands to take kids. Now they screened these kids ostensibly to remove any emotional issues behind, although it's really hard to see exactly how they did that. They came up out of 1,000 sort of people that began the screening. They came up with about 200 patients that met the criteria of both parents consenting without any coercion, withholding puberty once it started, but actually, in most cases, the average age, it was about 12 or 12 and a half. That's 2 years into female puberty, 1 year into male puberty. So these kids had started and then their puberty was interrupted. And on average, about 3 to 4 years later, they were started on cross-sex hormones. So there was really a stopping of puberty, a period of time of continued evaluation. But the problem was that at the end of 20 years, when they published their data, they'd lost all but 59 patients from that 200.
Right.
No
right.
explanation what happened to them. So this isn't a good study base to say, oh, we have such great results. Look at, we have 59 really happy functional patients. Well, what happened to the other 150? Where did they go? Why did they quit? None of that has ever been published. So that was sort of exposed a couple of years ago. A wonderful article in the Journal of Human Sexuality by Julia Mason and Dr. ABBVIE and Stephen Levine. They basically said, hey, this is the foundation of this treatment protocol that began in Europe, that was revised repeatedly by the World Professional Association of Transgender Health, or WPATH. It's built on sand, but this is the basis of everything that was done in the U.S. The Endocrine Society built their protocol off the WPATH guidelines, modified a little bit, but they wouldn't have gotten anywhere to start with if this protocol had been condemned for the worthless junk it was to begin with. No one would have gone there. But there's all this cover up, okay? And it's not right because no one will dialogue with those of us who question it. We are shut down. We are canceled. We can't get published in the standard medical journals. No one. Now, the only reason not to do that is not because we're kook conspiracy, tinfoil hat wearing people who hate children. We love our patients. We're so compassionately involved in their best possible care, and we can't get anywhere. We just literally we're shunned from the medical meetings we're allowed to attend. But this past spring, I attended the Pediatric Endocrine Society meeting in San Diego. On the application, and it was for everybody, but on the application, you check here to acknowledge that that if you are discourteous to any of the speakers, you will be removed. You will be, removed from the society. You will be removed from the hotel, and that's it. End of sentence. That's never been done before at any medical meeting I've ever attended. There were security people surrounding the entire auditorium during the transgender speaker series, which there were 3 speakers that got up and just opened their mouths and gave the pablum of life-saving, healthy, no problems, totally reversible at the beginning and the middle, la-di-da-di-da. We have all the data. Studies all show how good this is for you. The studies that they quote are absolutely awful. They have no real scientific validity. They cherry pick data and put it together and say, see, all these people, 60% of the kids will kill themselves if we don't let them do this. And nobody regrets it. Less than 1% of the patients have even that. We've never met anybody that regretted that. Well, they're just keeping.
So they lie. They lie.
Lying over and over and over and over again, and that just keeps getting repeated in courts of law. When there's a custody case where one parent says no to this nonsense, and the other parent says, "Oh, I want it all." And in this day and age, the family court system, the judges, they don't care. If they hear standard of care. All major medical associations approve of this life-saving care, quote unquote. And anybody else that doesn't is a freaky, kooky, fringe person. Shame on you. Go away. Okay. So
that happened to Jeanette Cooper here in Illinois, where she lost her daughter for not affirming her. Right. And so real quickly, I'll give you just a quick breather, doctor, just to catch people up. So you've talked a bit about the background of your what brought you into this advocacy now as a doctor, some of the history of this practice of the lie of gender ideology in medicine, and how it has branched off into two very different ethos. One, in my opinion, unethical and sinister, and one where you have verged into this ethical pathway to really empower parents. And you mentioned courts, judges listening to this, right, in Illinois and beyond. Anyone who's going to have a part in this caring concern for children, you are a voice that doesn't get represented in mainstream media. You get canceled. You don't get elevated in interviews. You get canceled. You get harassed. We all do. All of us that are genuinely trying to protect children. We're not yet getting the elevation in mainstream media. I think it'll come, but that's why we're having you on. And so please continue with how the W path and all the lie of medicine and where doctors are finding themselves right now.
Well, it's interesting. There is at least a slowing of the interventions, some because of laws in states. We've been very instrumental in teaching legislators. And it's after the fact. Where everything should really start is the physicians should govern themselves. Okay, period, end of sentence. Okay, that is the ideal, that the state medical boards say, no, you can't do this, or yes, this is a standard of care. Florida jumped on right from the beginning. Governor DeSantis down there was very, very forward thinking when he allowed his Medicaid division, if you will, to really research and create standards of care based on sound science. So they developed their own state standards of care. And it was a broad spectrum of people with medical ethics from Canada, mental health providers. I was there as a physician and a practicing pediatric endocrinologist. We really presented a non-attacking, just basic, this is truth. This tends not to be truth. Just because a subcommittee of a very large medical organization with an ideology agenda, just because they put together guidelines, they are not standards of care. Standards of care would say everybody from both sides, our side of the issue and their side of the issue, got together in a room and hammered each other out to this is what we both as a consensus can say is where we stand. That's called a standard of care. That's how they're established. They pretend they have standards of care. They have their own ideology guidelines that they publish. And the Endocrine Society actually admitted this is what we believe. This is not what we can prove with science, but this is what we believe. That's not ever mentioned in courts of law. And the court's attorneys are pretty savvy about how not to get information brought into evidence. They can shut you down with, I object. And if it's a friendly judge, you can sit there all you want, but you can't open your mouth and tell the truth. So it's very frustrating. But Europe has now, after their 20 plus year experience, realized, this is not bringing the mental health improvement at all. And as a matter of fact, we think it's getting worse. The Danish have just published a study this past week saying mental health actually worsened, did not get better with all these interventions. The UK has shut down their programs. Sweden, Finland, France, the Norway, most recently, the Netherlands, of all places, has said, we're not going to do this to kids. We're putting on the brakes. We're taking a breath. We're going to reevaluate all this. The independent standards, worldwide standards, have been evaluated, looked at for all the studies, and the science is clearly on the side of saying it's harmful. Mental health counseling is the standard of care. It has been proven to work. There's a 90% improvement and a realignment of gender identity, if you will, with biologic sex. If you counsel these kids, you go through them in depth. And so all the states should pass, facilitating mental health evaluation and shutting down medical and surgical, interventions because they are not good and they are actually harmful. We know if you go for all the way to the end of the medical treatments that are offered, and then you do the surgical thing, you are sterilizing children who have yet to have any sexual experience of any renown that basically wants them to point their life in this new direction. They have no idea what they're doing. Their parents are consenting. Adolescents who are miserable want to get back at people. They've been, usually these kids are marginalized to begin with, and they're looking for a place to be accepted. And oh my gosh, the online glitter community that brings them in and promises them Valhalla and bright, shiny things and eternal happiness. They're recruited online and they know what to do. The whole suicide statistic of I'm going to kill myself if you don't let me do this comes from, among other places, the psychologists that are in these transgender clinics who say, here's what you say. You say you're going to kill yourself, and that'll get you on the pathway with nobody being able to fight the issue. To be sure, you always say you're going to kill yourself. You might do a little cutting, perhaps just kind of look and let them know how sad you are. And these kids are really emotional.
As a cry for help. Yeah.
It is a cry for help. They are, every single patient I've seen that's come to me, and they're limited because they know I don't prescribe hormones or block puberty. The parents come in and say, help me, give me some information. And there is in these families a lot of dark secrets and things where the kid's been traumatized, like the boy who was in the military family. Death, drug use, incarceration, sexual abuse, all these things add up. And this child is so mentally unraveled and is grabbing at things to put themselves back together. And they find it in this sort of glitter world that sounds really great. And there's a lot of celebrity. And I've been quoted as saying that, that by the opposition, how dare he say such a thing? These children are suffering. They would never do this for celebrity. Oh, and there's social contagion. The internet is where they get their information. It's unfiltered.
Right. And if they can get the dopamine hit, right, from the love bombing or being accepted, especially if they are in a deficit because they do have trauma in their lives, right?
And the females who are depressed, they get on a little testosterone and kabam, do they have emotional energy, and they are no longer depressed for a little bit. And
but it's a very short amount of time,
they
right?
are devastated. They are angry, dysfunctional. They, their lives are so badly hurt by these cross-sex hormones. And can you find a happy transgender adult that transitioned in so-called in adolescence? Sure, there are some of those. Okay, but no one is paying attention to the mental health of these people. They're not having constant counseling, because if they do, they'll realize, oh my God, I'm not better off. They promised me I'd be better off with all these interventions of social transitioning, medical transition, and the social transitioning is not reversible. Okay. Once that child's been ripped open and the Pandora's box is open, it's very difficult to be able to put that box back together and bring that child back, believing, and their friends and their family members, their cousins and aunts and uncles, that child's always looked at differently.
Well, and real quickly, I'll share with you. So we had uncovered through an advocate in Ogle County, Illinois, there was a group of girls. They were in 5th grade. They were over months of time. They were starting to become increasingly depressed. They were starting to be confused about their sexuality and their gender. And it was uncovered that a teacher had initiated a secret LGBTQ lunch club for all of them to come in and have these private conversations on all of this gender confusion and everything. And sure enough, when the parents found out and it was stopped, the girls started to feel better. They were no longer confused. They were growing as they should into their skin, into their bodies, and it was resolved. So fortunately, that was halted when parents figured this out. But as you go further and further and further along, they do tend to regress. We hear of it from families all the time. January talks about what happened to her daughter. So by then, yes, I think parents are realizing, oh my gosh, they're just in total chaos and they're getting the wrong advice. And here's what has us concerned here in Illinois, Doctor, is this House Bill 4876, which, by the way, all of us are very confident that this will not proceed or go anywhere because of the amount of pushback for parents saying, oh, no, you're not going to call us abusers if we do not give our children puberty blockers or mutilate them or sterilize them. But I wanted you to see what this representative, Anstava Murray in the 81st District, said in a response to a Facebook post. I'll just read it. She, concerned citizen, she said, trans kids go through irreversible damage from a puberty that doesn't match their gender identity every day in this country. To ignore that damage further harms trans children and puts them at risk for the mental health issues you purport to care about. Giving access to life-saving, gender-affirming care should be the standard. This is her ethos here. She is not a doctor, and I'm very concerned. You mentioned Florida took the lead on preventing this with Medicaid. Here in Illinois, I can tell you a whistleblower from Lurie Children's Gender Clinic was disgusted by the amount of Medicaid billing that they saw from the gender clinic. So in Illinois, this is apparently where they want to go. What is your response to her wording there?
Well, she is looking at puberty as if it's a disastrous consequence that must be interrupted and changed in these suffering children, totally ignoring the mental morbidity that caused this in the first place. They're putting the cart way ahead of the horse, and blaming society on the fact that these kids are in trouble emotionally, saying it's because of rejection of who they wish to become, and they're sidelined in what they call minority stress. And that is absolutely bogus. Okay. Mental health, this idea that they're putting them at risk if they don't give them so-called life-saving gender affirming care. There is nothing life-saving about it. They are medicalizing these children who, if they had not done this, let's just say that this is a child wrestling with same-sex attraction as a concept, and they're an adolescent, and they are so unhappy with what they are feeling about themselves, and self-guilt, whatever what they call homophobia, if you will, and the way out of this is to lop off their fully functional organs and try to make some plastic surgery made ones that don't have any function at all, to pretend that they're in a new body that has been inside of them emotionally since they were God knows when, 3 years, 5 years, last year, whatever. This is a total misconception. The world's literature now says unequivocally, the American College of Pediatricians just released our position statement in regard to mental health of adolescents, and it proves through 60 references that are readily available to everyone that there is absolutely no benefit. This is not life saving at all. And the study, the most recent one from Denmark, says it's worse. You are hurting these kids. They have a higher propensity for killing themselves than they would have if you'd left them alone and counseled them. That counseling should be the only issue that is on board, and it should be supported. It should not be denied. There are bills in California essentially saying these kids cannot be counseled. That doing so is called, quote, conversion therapy, which, of course, who's converting whom to begin with? It's the language they use. And this representative very glibly says, oh, they were suffering. This was life-saving. And to deny them that is to deny them a happy life. I'm not sure what her background is or where she comes from or what she believes in, but it is clearly misdirected and based on phony information that is actually opposite. It's a downright lie. And so why should that woman be listened to if all she does is open her mouth and tell lies? I mean, it's just astounding.
Well, thank you for clearing that up, because there is a lot of misinformation out there and a lot of reaction by emotion rather than clinical insight. And so I appreciate that. And I will have links to all of the things that we're showing here, all of these snapshots, including that position statement from the American College of Pediatricians. And here in Illinois is where the American Academy of Pediatrics is based. I'm very, very worried about their how loud they are to the microphone on this issue and how they have adopted gender ideology medicine. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on parents, particularly parents with young children. Maybe they're vetting, who their pediatrician is going to be. Is it worth them asking when they take their children in for well checks or what have you, to ask what their position is on gender medicine and if they affiliate or agree with the American Academy of Pediatrics?
I think it's not a bad idea to do so. Hopefully they would uncover the issue that, well, I don't know much about that, but the AAP says the following things. And, they give us a lot of wonderful advice and support and do so much in terms of immunizations that are routine, that are helpful and not controversial. They have conferences for education. They stand up for the child in legislation from Capitol Hill. They are the friends. They are the good people with white hats. I may have some reservations about that because I don't see it. But they're the ones that are the experts. I'm not. Okay. That would give you an idea that pediatrician is probably in the background, not really comfortable with that. The other thing that's happened, and most miraculously, is that the AAP has been sued for their guidelines. The physician who wrote those guidelines has been sued because he was the author of those guidelines. And that physician has been sued by a patient for harm done to her by being transed by him aggressively. And so when that kind of stuff begins to come to the surface, you say, well, ooh, that's a little embarrassing. We have called out the AAP on this issue directly. They have been challenged directly. The current president has been challenged directly and says, well, we didn't publish our book. We were going to publish a book on this, and we're not publishing it now. We're going to do some review. Okay. So they are backpedaling. They did not update that position statement, which by their bylaws must be either updated or retired after 5 years. And last year was 5 years. And they are just not, they're kind of sitting quietly thinking, I hope nobody notices, but we're not going to update it right now. We're not going to update it at all. So it's just, I mean, I think pediatricians within the Academy of Pediatricians, AAP, there are pediatricians who have stood up and said, what are we doing? Can we go back to science? They've tried to quiet that down and pretend it didn't exist just by not recognizing that internal turmoil that's happening. But I think that with good publicity and news stories of lawsuits, that's how this will end. Is that
it is? Yeah, the lawsuits, absolutely.
But I don't want 10,000 kids between now and when it's finally squashed to be damaged. They are irreparably damaged at all levels. They will all carry scars from this, even if they turn around and walk back away on their own volition. They're going to have remembered what happened to their bodies. And if they had surgical removal of their breasts, particularly, the girls are going to know when they someday get pregnant, they can't breastfeed. And there are
already heartbreaking stories of that. There are people who have courageously shared that on social media. There's a image of a woman holding her newborn, and she's devastated because she won't be able to breastfeed her child. And that realization came too late. And to your point, as many children as can be saved by this, as many interventions that can be made by clinicians, by parents, by counselors, by the court, by pastors, anyone who's going to speak truth to these children can make all the difference in the world. Absolutely. I think that more and more pediatricians, I think, will come out, and you look at Dr. Heim in Texas, the surgeon who is now the whistleblower, and his conscience, this all got to him, and he has spoken very candidly about the harms that are done surgically to children. And so I think that as more and more people want to be on the right side of this issue, they hopefully will find courage. And I implore any pediatrician to be as knowledgeable on these issues, to know who you are, and to know this statement that's out there on, the studies showing that this is not helping children. And Dr. Heim says, I have it written down, he said, you can't treat a psychiatric problem with physical body mutilation. And he references the analogy of the lobotomies and how that was stopped, right? So I do think you're right that we will see some positive, hopefully, traction on this, but we still have yet to go.
Well, I would suggest that you direct anybody that has questions to the biologicalintegrity.org website. We created this in response to the need for people to have a source of information. This website is aimed at patients themselves, parents of patients who are going through this, pediatricians, legislators, psychologists. There's a place for everybody to go and click on that and then look at the points that are made, there are bullet points, with references that they can go and choose to look up if they wish, but it's based on science. And so it sort of essentially pops all the balloons that are floating around trying to produce this kind of, treatment of children that through the ideology, and said, don't use ideology, use science. It has nothing to do with religious faith. However, many people who have strong opinions on this are people of profound religious faith who cannot do harm to children. But not doing harm to your patients is not based on religion. It's based on medical ethics that started back with Hippocrates and should govern everything we do in medicine. Do not harm your patients, period.
Yes. And it's great to see the green states that are taking, strong efforts to protect minors. Illinois is in the gray. I'm hopeful that as people pay more attention to who their policymakers are, I think that this woman here, Anstava Murray, has not earned the vote of parents who are concerned about their children, who are concerned about this community of social contagion that's happening to kids. We want to protect them from that. So I think as people get more knowledge on these issues, they will do better and vote their values. If you want to protect children, vote your values.
Well, the thing is that this has become somewhat of a political issue. However, it has no, support. If you look at, it's not a political issue. It is science, and if we can put this through the lens of going back to the basics of medicine and not doing harm. We have consensus across the aisle in a number of places. It's just it has been made by the comments of that state representative are politicizing it to say we have an oppressed group. Let's help the oppressed. Well,
she's going to be a savior.
Yeah. I mean, so she paints herself as I am for the small child who is suffering. Well, we on our side are all about the suffering of that child. Okay. And I had one of my more resistant patients look at me and say, what do you care about? Why would you want, I'm going to ask you a question. Why do you want me not to go on testosterone? And I said, well, first of all, I've met you and visited with you now. This is the 5th time. She said, well, you can't know me in that short period of time. I said, well, medicine is kind of like that. We get to know you in ways that you don't know we know you. And my whole purpose on here is to advocate for your welfare. I care deeply about making you a whole and happy person. And I can't at this point in time until you understand everything to the bone. And finally, at a visit, I made eye contact with her, and she said to me, do you mean that I cannot become a boy? And I said, yes, I really do mean that. She said, there's no way? I said, no, you will always be a biological female until your last breath. And she sort of sat back for a minute, and she said, well, then never mind. I don't need hormones.
Wow.
And I was so far taken aback. And I mean, I got her to know that I cared so much for her as a patient. Yeah. And
by speaking the truth.
I don't think anybody has ever cared for her to that matter. I mean, I don't want to, her parents were pretty off the wall in terms of their own personal relationships and divorce and whatnot that was going on. And I mean, it was like, I'm fighting. I hate myself. I hate everybody. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. Oh my God.
Oh,
you really do care for me. And I said, yes, I do. And that was the little tiny window I got through. And it was, I thought, oh, she's just pulling my leg. But no, she wasn't. It was like, I felt, and every time I meet with these kids, they are so traumatized and they're so sad, and they are just crying out for help. And it's like, I have to kind of wind down after a visit and
I bet.
Just kind of go someplace quiet and kind of think, please, dear God, give me the strength, give me the right words, just please be with me on this, because I want to save this child's life. And that to be called anti-trans just glibly by people like that state rep is just like, oh, you just don't know. You just don't know.
They don't know.
You don't give a rip about the kid. Your idea is I'm going to save an oppressed class, and I will be well loved and respected because of that. And that's oh my God. The world should not work.
Yeah, it's crazy. And so, yes, I think that this, we reject this. This is not speaking clinically. This is not speaking with true ethics and care and concern for these kids. So I'm very grateful to you, Dr. Van Meter, that you are recommending the right pathways for parents and for policymakers and for communities to know the truth and to speak the truth. So this we will have all linked for people to access this recommendation for biological integrity, this website. And also we had Jeanette Cooper last week. She's with Partners for Ethical Care. She is based here in Illinois, and they have a great support group for families that are dealing with this that can get truly ethical care for their children and family member. So please use this link if this is something that you'd like to access. January, she was able to talk about Do No Harm, another organization. So good people are doing good work, doctor, and they are speaking truth. This is a church transgender response guide. A lot of my fellow moms and advocates across the country are equipping churches locally with this resource. I think that a lot of people, you mentioned, being led by faith. I think it's a lot of people, and faith leaders need to be able to speak to this issue and be well versed on it. Even if they haven't dealt with it yet in their churches, they may at some point. And I think it's going to be sooner than later. So the links for people to get this are available. It's a great resource guide.
You bring up that's a wonderful. Bernadette Broyles is sort of in that organization that produced that book but
yes.
The thing is that in the guise, this is just so perverse, in the guise of being a wonderful, kind and loving person who follows the precepts of their Lord Jesus Christ, they don't want anybody to be marginalized. That would be judgmental and that would be harmful. And so accept them as they believe they are. Who God does not make mistakes. And so they've got some well-meaning, religious leaders. They're pulling their strings. In the background, they're laughing their heads off because they have no religious faith-based life whatsoever that guides them to. Otherwise, they wouldn't even go this direction. So they're using people's faith to their advantage and, saying no one would want these children to kill themselves. Whoever does, who those mean, awful doctors, those state legislatures that have passed these evil laws, they are harming children purposely. They are evil-hearted, bad-hearted people. And the answer is, Lordy, you just don't, look what you're saying, what you're recommending. Realize, and if they had the inner strength to not want to hide behind everything, they will not come out and talk with us at all in any open forum. They do not want to do that because they will be lost in the arena of ideas and their ideas crushed into oblivion. If they would,
you can't even debate them. Right.
We'll debate them, but we're ready. And they are running and the father slamming doors in our faces. So.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm sure, offer to Rep. Stava Murray if she would like to come and do a live stream with you and have some of her statements debated and discussed. That would be great. I'm sure she wouldn't take us up on it, but open invitation, right, Doctor?
Yeah, absolutely.
So these are 3 other books we have linked: Lost in Translation, A Child Psychiatrist's Guide Out of the Madness by Dr. Miriam Grossman. The Querying of the American Child comes out actually February 29th, leap year day. That was with Logan Lansing and James Lindsay. This is a really accessible understanding of the history of this movement, especially in pop culture and social media and schools, and some of the players behind that ideology that have come into this social contagion. And then Trans by Helen Joyce out of the UK. So these books are all linked at our website. The great news is that as people in Illinois wake up to this agenda, you are sending your emails respectfully to this policymaker to say that you oppose this. You oppose this wrong lie of an ideology being put into legislation. So more than 2,600 emails last check have been sent to her just through our portal alone. I know you guys are sending emails directly from your own email, and that's great, but keep going. I think the more of us that get on record with her, all of the legislators see this pushback. Nobody's going to want to have their name on anything that has to do with calling parents abusers purely for stopping the gender affirmation of their children. Right. So get on record. Our organization is here for you to be empowered to protect your kids, to preach the truth, to share resources, and to get involved. So contact us if you want to get more involved locally. And then just to preview some of the upcoming speakers in our live streams, we have Sarah Higdon, Christine Rebstock, Nicholas Blooms. And then next week the following week, around March 12th, which is Detransition Awareness Day, we are inviting detransitioners to speak to how they awakened to the harms that were done to them and why they're trying to empower families and children to not make the same mistakes and to have people courageously stand in the gap between children and this ideology. So if you are a detransitioner and you would like to speak with us, please let us know. We're scheduling those now. Dr. Van Meter, any parting words of advice, whether it's to doctors or to parents, to protect children from the harms you have seen clinically and going forward, what we can do?
I think we just need to educate people as best we can, given the dragnet that's placed over the top of us to keep us quiet. Just do not speak in anger. Okay, speak in love, because we love these children and we care for them deeply. and get a hold of as many of your legislators that you can, even those that might oppose you, and say, look, I'm just here to give you information. I have some resources. I've been doing some reading. I'm really concerned about this legislative effort on your part. Let's protect our kids, and we have the science behind us. Again, do no harm.
Absolutely. Well, I'm grateful for you, and I'm lifting prayers for you and all of your colleagues and anyone clinically that can stand in the gap between these children and this harm of medicalization, so that children can get the proper care to handle whatever the struggles they're enduring. But thank you for the work you do. And I wish you well with your family. I think you're headed to a grandchild's birthday soon, so enjoy that. And thank you again, Dr. Van Meter. For everyone who joined us, great. Thank you so much. Please share the recording, and the links to everything that we showed on the screen during this live stream will be posted to our blog either tonight or tomorrow. So thank you again, Dr. Van Meter, and hope to see you again soon.
Likewise. Thanks so much for the work you do as well.
Good night. Thank you, everyone.